The biggest problem that I'm seeing right now, while I'm understanding the narrative, I just got done doing Whitlock, and the biggest problem I'm seeing right now, when you have critical race theory and you have the social justice movement, critical sex theory, critical queer theory, people think that they are trying to instill just another worldview. And they're right about that. But their worldview is instilled by the way you hate the other person.
Right.
Right. Like, they don't care if there's fighting and bickering, even though there might not be the topic, so long as there's fighting and bickering and hatred and the dehumanization of the other person. Now, that's what they want. So they want you to have an opinion that's even stark opposed to theirs. They don't care if your opinion is opposed or agrees with. They have no care whatsoever. Critical theory just wants you to be in opposition with something for the purpose of creating a revolution.
Right. But it's that constant revolution. If you believe that the only way to move forward and progress is through conflict, right? I mean, that is it's a central part of the understanding of the progressive worldview, the secular worldview.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
But it goes all the way back. Like, the ancient world had the exact same take on progress, right? Is how did the Titans progress? How did the gods progress forward? Well, Zeus killed the Titans, or he cut them up and banished them, right? He overcame them. And then how did people then move forward? They overcame the gods. How does society move forward? The plebs overthrow, right? You've got this idea that you need chaos, and that chaos is the ingredient that gives you your next order, right? That there's this move forward into order, and that the ideal is being, imposed somehow. Hopefully somebody's ideal is being imposed, and it's not just random. But anything's better than nothing, right? Any progress is better than nothing. And so we got to have chaos. We got to have sides. We got to have rivalries. It's really interesting. I was just looking through, or I was just listening. I was doing some late night writing, and I've got a playlist that's all this kind of 90s heavy metal and and punk music and like funk punk from the 90s and a lot of math rock and stuff. And this Tool song comes on. I'm not saying like, oh yeah, you should listen to Tool all the time. Like, that's not good for your soul. They're great musicians, but this song is called Schism, and I know the pieces fit because I watched them fall away, mildewed and smoldering, fundamental differing, pure intention juxtaposed will set two lovers' souls in motion, disintegration as it goes testing our communication. The light that fueled our fire then has burned a hole between us, so we cannot seem to reach an end, crippling our communication. I know the pieces fit because I watched them tumble down. No fault, none to blame. It doesn't mean I don't desire to point the finger, blame the other, watch the temple topple over to bring the pieces back together and rediscover communication. The poetry that comes from squaring off between and the circling is worth it, finding beauty in the dissonance. There was a time that the pieces fit, but I watched them fall away, mildewed and smoldering, strangled by our coveting. I've done the math enough to know the dangers of our second guessing, doomed to crumble unless we grow and strengthen our communication. Right? Like
that's better than most evangelical songs that are written
That's
today.
Exactly what I thought. Right? Sitting there listening, I listened to it because the drummer is incredible, and I've been playing the drums for 25, 30 years, and then all of a sudden I thought, what's he talking about? And I'm listening through the lyrics, and I'm thinking, well, he's talking about, right, our society, that there's this memory that we have, that there seems like there used to be a time when we could communicate, that we had enough in common that we could still converse, but now we can't. That enough has crumbled out from underneath us that we no longer can stand face to face without becoming rivals. And he says that foundation is gone. And where's the evidence? Well, that we can't communicate, right? And he says, but if we work harder at communication, maybe we'll discover a way to communicate across the chasm, right? The problem is that doesn't work. Right?
Yeah, right. No, right.
You actually have to rebuild the foundation to communicate, and we live in this time when the right and the left both are saying, the chasm is keeping us safe, so we've got to grow it. Right, the chasm is keeping us safe from them over there, that tribal mentality.
Well, that's kind of, I don't know when this happened, but that's exactly when, listening to Thomas Price and you guys talk last time, hearing that Christianity developed a way for us to communicate the truths of reality theologically and metaphysically, right? And that Christianity established that. And when that left, all of a sudden we got this world war that comes into place, right? Like you got to really understand, like, that's how we got here. And the transformation of the gospel, when Christ died, the transformation of the world happens, and then language is being restored. What does that remind you of, right? That's the Tower of Babel being reversed. And Christianity brings this universal language to the culture, and the culture is then unified because of it. And what is go ahead.
There's a universal language, but there's also an embrace of the universal realities of human beings.
Well, what that language points to, right? Like, right. That's what's restored in that language, right?
Right. Yeah. I was reading the story earlier this week of Pope Leo, right? And it's this amazing story where the Roman Empire is crumbling out from underneath everybody, and there's Visigoths. I can't remember if it's Visigoths or Vandals that are getting ready to take over Rome. And I think one time it's Visigoth, another time it's Vandals, right? And they're like, we don't know how to talk to them. So the Romans' plan is everybody lock your doors and hope that when they come in, they go to the neighbor's house and not yours, right? That's kind of and the bishop says, I'll talk to them. Right? Says the Romans had lost faith in their own empire because, Gibbon's Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire is helpful in one sense because he gets to the fact that the Roman Empire had lost its moral compass. But what's unhelpful is he doesn't point out the fact that they had actually lost faith in their empire, right? That the empire, they had believed in it. They had believed the eschatological promises that the emperor had given 100 years ago, 200 years ago. They currently didn't. They no longer, so they still would repeat some of the eschatological promises. The Roman Empire will,
to the Roman Empire,
right? Yeah, the Roman Empire will last 1,000 years.
Right.
The emperor is a divine presence among us. The emperor holds the 7 wandering stars in his right hand. Like all those, they still believed that stuff 200 years earlier. At this point, they didn't, and so a challenge came, and they're like, "What's there to defend? Right? What's left to defend?" And so they had lost that, but they had also so completely separated themselves metaphysically in their mind from the tribal people that there's these tribes out there. They're barbarians, and they don't believe that they can communicate with them, right? So it's like they say babble, 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 barber, 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 right? That's their language makes no sense to us, and the bishop says, well, has anybody tried to talk to them, right? They're surrounding us. They're about to attack. Has anybody, and they're like, nah, we just locked the doors.
You can't talk to barbarians.
You can't talk to barbarians. And he's like, well, I've got some in my church. Let me try. Let's go out there and talk to them, right? So the Christians, the bishop leading the way, a small group of them go out and say, hey, can we talk? And they're like, oh, sure. Yeah. And so the first time they talk, they work out a deal where they don't sack Rome. The second time they come back, I can't remember if it's the same barbarians or different ones. They come back and they go out and they talk and they strike a deal that where there's going to be some money. They can come in and there's certain things they can take, but they're not allowed to kill anybody. And they're like, yeah, okay, it's fine. This is more about, going and getting money than anything else. So sure, we'll just come in and we'll take some things. And so they end up, it's a payoff. But they weren't willing to fight. There wasn't an army ready to defend them. And so he basically bought all of their freedom, bought all of their lives, right? Bought the Roman citizens' lives because he believed that they could communicate when the Romans didn't. And so he is buying the lives of all these pagans behind him because he has a different eschatology for the city, right? It's not the city, it's not the Roman Empire's eschatology, but he believes that this city is not Christianized yet, right? This is a pre-Christian city, which is what all of the cities. I mean, there are some cities that maybe won't survive; they'll be destroyed because of their sin. But every city before destruction is simply a pre-Christian city, right? In that eschatological framework, and so it gives you hope for the city, and it gives you a belief that you can communicate with your enemies, even if they're your enemies, right? That there is a foundation underneath us that we're all standing on, whether we get it or acknowledge it or whatever, that we are all standing on the same foundation. And there's people trying to jump off it and, lose their ability to communicate. But
this is why, you can't preach the gospel unless you believe that.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't, you have to believe that the gospel is the kind of thing that speaks to the very makeup of the other person that you're talking to in order for them to be able to do that. Right. And not just that it is able to speak to, but that there's something supernatural inside of the gospel that recreates that person to be more human. Right.
Yeah.
And so when you believe that and the power of that, that's just having faith, right? Having faith that the gospel is going to do that because it's what it's designed to do. Then it makes you really fearless. It
makes you fearless, and it's not. What's interesting is it's not even that there's something supernatural inside the gospel. It's that there is a super person who has promised that this is his tool, right? Your words are his tool, and it's the Holy Spirit has said, "Hey, I'm going to be building the kingdom of God, and the hammer that I'm going to use is your words. So go out and speak them, because the more words that are out there, the more hammers I'm going to use." Now, he doesn't need our help. He can do it all on his own. And there are times when people get saved when they're all out by their lonesome. My dad, a dog, preached the gospel to my dad. That's how he got saved. And so you've got there are times that happens, but the way that it's promised it will happen is a hammer, the hammer that God will use, that the Spirit will use to build up the kingdom, is the words of his people.
Why did you want to make the separation between the supernaturalness of the gospel? Because that seemed to be very important to you to make that separation.
Well, because it's not there are no impersonal forces right? The Spirit is a person. And I
think we believe that, but when we talk about it, we've bought into this Gnostic reality that we don't decipher those two things. That's what you're doing. You're getting at my default Gnosticistic attitude, even though I don't know that I'm doing it.
Right. Well, yeah.
Is that right?
I'm trying to do it in a non-rival. I'm not.
Why did you just say that?
Because we're friends. I'm not trying to do it in a rivalrous way.
No, but that's a great way to say.
Because you do it to me too, right? Where you're like, but what about Black Wall Street? And I'm like, what about it?
But I'm not that kind with that. You're way more kind. I saw what you did, and I'm feeling like somebody's doing surgery on me, but it doesn't feel like it hurts,
but
I just be like, hey,
Yeah. Well, but
that's really good and really important, because this is what it means to try and get this Gnostic thinking out. That's so. Right. What I just said was what's built into evangelicalism, the supernaturalness of the gospel, right? And that what you just did and how you use that and talk about, no, it's not an impersonable force. That is something we got to get out of our language.
Yeah, because that's
Jason, it's good.
It is. Well, and so a couple of things. One, Solomon says, "He who pursues kindness pursues life." Right, and
you give me twice. Okay, I see.
So now that's just one. And so that's something that have tried to commit to, I want kind words that build up, and you can't. There are times when kind words, are like, hey,
right, that's a kind
McFly,
word,
right? But if you're always McFly on everybody, then you lose the ability to ratchet up, right? So I had recently, it's like, if your voice is always raised, then your voice is never raised, right? You don't have,
that's just your normal talking tone.
Yeah, that becomes the norm. And then when you need to ratchet up, there is no up. And so that's
actually the only way up at that point is physical. There is no, you go right past conversation in one voice, and it's only, you cross the line to physical. That's
exactly. Yeah. So you and so that's just something that anger has been one of my just fundamental temptations that I've dealt with since I was young. So I've had to, God has been digging at that, digging the dirt out of that well for a lot of years in me. And
that's funny because so there's two things I got to do real quick. I want to say something about anger. Anger, though, has now become a part of character and attitude that is normalized.
Yep. Yeah.
So that when we hear somebody, that is just their personality. But we have to remember that there's nothing wrong with being angry, but it's used so sinfully all the time.
Yeah.
Right. So I understand that. The other thing is, I really have to have you go back and flesh out how that statement really is. So it's as Gnostic, because when we talk about the gospel and we talk about supernatural, we separate these two worlds.
Yeah.
Right.
So the way I think about it is, Protestants, evangelical Protestants, American evangelical Protestants, we reject transubstantiation in the Lord's Supper, but only because we've moved it to our gospel preaching, right? So the metaphysic of transubstantiation says God has instilled power into the person to be able to transform the nature of things, so that he doesn't have to be present to do it, right? That his power is transferable. And we say, and so a priest in 1450 stands over and he says, "Abracadabra," in Latin, which ends up becoming abracadabra, right? He says it in Latin, and he transforms the nature of the bread and the wine into flesh and blood. And now the accidents, the things that we can touch with our senses, are all still bread and still wine, but the essence inside it has been transformed into the body and blood of Christ, right? And the priest can do that because of the words that he's been given. So he's been given this liturgy, this words, and it becomes this magical power that is separated from God because God hands it over. And we say, no, you can't do that. That's not true. That's not the way it works. And then we go out and preach the gospel as if that's what we're doing, right? We say the gospel is the power to save. And what that means is I've got the words of salvation, and that is all true. The reason, though, it's the power to save is because the Father has promised, and then Jesus confirmed the promise that the Spirit is with us, right? And that the Spirit uses the tool of the preaching of the gospel to for people to be born again, right? So, and that's the language, right? They are born again; they're reborn by water and the Spirit, and the tool that the Spirit uses is the declaration of the good news, right? So there's nothing impersonal about the power of the gospel. The power of the gospel is the super person of the Spirit present and active, right? He is the Lord and giver of life, right? So we confess these things and we believe them technically, but then we stop believing them in certain aspects. So we've just moved our transubstantiation into our gospel preaching and sometimes into our music. But that's a whole nother way of a whole nother thing. So, but so but thankfully it's, we still are preaching by faith. We evangelize by faith, and it's not by getting the mechanics of it right that it works, but that is what ends up happening when we hold on to that transubstantiation metaphysic over the course of generations. It becomes you got to get the methods right, and then people will get. Which is why
we fight so much over methods. Well, is it presuppositional?
Is it presuppositional or not? Because people aren't going to get saved if you're not a presuppositionalist or a classical apologist or what. And I'm like, I have my convictions, right, but the reason they're important is because that's the cement under the promise of God. Right. The promise of God is what I have going out to evangelize. God says, go evangelize. I like converting people, and I want you to be involved in it. You're going to like this, right? Come along. And we're like, if I never share the gospel, am I really a Christian? And we get into these weird, because of our metaphysic, we get into cul-de-sacs. And then it's, did somebody really become a Christian if they didn't have a conviction of sin that led to an emotional response that led to a chaotic moment in which they weren't sure, and then that chaotic moment was put to rest? Where you've got to have this like communist revolution in the soul, with the replacing of a new that replaces the king on your heart, and we end up converting everything into methods. Often it's just the way that we got saved becomes the method that we go out with. But the reality is the Holy Spirit, he's at work all the time. Thomas Howard wrote a great book called Christ the Tiger that is just about how God converted him, but how God hunted him like a tiger. And he was fleeing through the jungle, but there's this presence in the shadows, and it's beautiful. The prose, Thomas Howard's a great writer. He wrote Christianity, the True Humanism, Chancer the Dance, right? He's a wonderful apologist, but his own conversion story is not at all like what other conversion stories look like. But every conversion story is
keep going.
Actually
I'm going to Amazon to buy some books.
There's not a method because the gospel isn't a method. Just like the Lord's Supper doesn't become the Lord's Supper because you get all the words right and you take it through the right method. Presenting the gospel, it's an introduction to Jesus, right? It's a declaration of the kingship of Jesus. It is an offer of the forgiveness of sins for all those that come to him. It's an offer of rest to those that have been heavy laden, right? The gospel is so many things that there's no escaping it, right? There's too many spokes on the wheel for it to not be able to connect to anyone anywhere, right? I think a good example, one of the, pastoring, we often run in, unfortunately there's the teenagers, young teen girls especially, but boys as well, cut themselves more and more often now in our day, right? I've been
picking up a lot.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more common. They start planning their tattoos, at 12, 11, which is way too early to be thinking about pain rituals, right? But there's this.
That's more thinking of, you know what though? Just to interrupt real quick, they're not just thinking of pain rituals, because that is what it is, a ritual. But they're hungry for baptism.
Right, they're hungry for baptism. They're hungry for justification. Yeah, they know they need their guilt removed, and they know they deserve to bleed because of it.
Yeah. That's right. Exactly right. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
And it's so that's a place where the spoke of the gospel fits real well. Yeah. But if you think of it as a method and not as an invitation into a greater story, not as a frame narrative for every moment, there's so many ways to understand the way the gospel relates. When you think of it that way, then you have the I don't know, creative opportunity in every moment to say, Jesus has something to say about this moment, or Jesus actually is the solution to your problem or your desire, or hey, that sin there is a solution. There's forgiveness for that, right? There's all different ways, and if you've got a young person cutting themselves, our temptation is to go the psychological route immediately and say, hey, why do you feel so bad about yourself? You're so wonderful. Right.
And Jesus thinks so too.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And Jesus does love them. Right. But the evidence for it is that he already was stabbed. He already was cut for them. Right. So that impulse to cut themselves is actually, there's something true about that. But it's becoming a self-rivalry, right? The only way out of a rivalry is a scapegoat, right? A scapegoat that takes the rivalry onto themselves. And so Jesus already was cut, already bled, already was stabbed. And so the impulse to self-harm is, instead of saying you shouldn't feel guilty, right? That is a temporary solution, right? What you need is for the guilt to be taken away, right? So you feel guilty. Well, actually, okay, there is an objective guilt, right, that our sin has. That guilt was nailed to the cross, right? That guilt, that guilt became spikes that went through Jesus's hands and feet, right? So that guilt really does it is objective, so it needs to be dealt with and objectively, right? And you got to get your eyes off your own wounds and onto the wounds of Christ, right? Because there's freedom there. There's not enough blood in you to bloodlet your own sins.
That's, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all I can think about when you said that is, remember the children of Israel are inside of the wilderness and they're getting bit up by snakes, and God tells Moses, hey, Moses, grab one of those snakes, lift the serpents, lift them up, right?
Yeah.
Because it was already ran through. It was already, right? And Christ in the same way, there goes your victory through this. That's really good. So I got to ask you, we don't have a lot of time today because we just like fitting stuff in. It's crazy and nuts. I don't know who we're talking about today because I have been traveling. I don't know who we're in conversation with. I just started talking to you, and like we normally do in a telephone conversation, it's like it just went. But did you have somebody already that you wanted to bring into the conversation?
I was thinking it might be good to talk a little bit about common law, common law theory, because I've seen a lot of I just saw this again yesterday, right? So I was over on Gab, and somebody was saying, here's more evidence for fraud in the election. Therefore, Trump is the real president, right? And I was like, that's false, right? Let's say Trump actually won the election, hands down, and we can prove it. He's still not the president, because presidents aren't made by elections, right? Presidents are made by each state sends their representatives to.
People don't know how elections actually work.
Yeah, they don't know how elections actually work, and they are the conservatives are thinking like revolutionaries. Right? They're thinking that this is all that the government is simply an extension of the will of the masses.
They're thinking democracy.
Right? They're thinking democracy. We don't live in a democracy because democracies are hellholes.
That's right.
The democracies have never worked outside. So democracies work in tribal settings. Beyond that, they've never worked. But that's because a tribe is a family.
Yeah.
Right? So
and these are fairly small too.
They're small. It's not a. There's not a. you haven't yet reached civil government at the tribe
exactly.
level, right?
Yeah,
Civil
yeah,
government
that's
is
right.
a step above the tribe because that's a family. That's the am I allowed to say things that people don't like?
Bro,
Okay.
we've already started. We said Jesus. That's enough.
Yeah, I know. Right. So I've got a whole bunch of friends that are in the patriarchy movement, and I know they mean well. But patriarch, the word that they're using doesn't mean what they're saying, right? So patriarch is a civil government, and they're talking about family governments, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and so there's just confusion.
Yeah.
But the confusion is on our side, not on their side, but it's because we have made the same error, and so we think that the problem is how people voted has not been enforced, rather than when in reality that's not how presidents are made, because we're not thinking about law in a historic way, right? We're thinking about law and civil government as if the goal is to take the ideals, right? What would be perfect? Let's take that and let's impose it, right? The problem with that way of thinking is it's all illegal, right?
Right.
So
right.
let's say you find out, you find out the whole that the whole election was a fraud, right?
Right.
And that Trump won hands down, and if he then goes and gets the military and goes and takes over and moves into the White House, he's still a usurper, or he's a usurper at that point, right? Because presidents aren't made by elections. Presidents are made by the what's the
delegate and the representation?
Yeah,
representative?
the delegates and the representative of the college, the
electoral college.
The electoral college, right? But the electoral college is one of the most brilliant things about our system. The electoral college, though, doesn't come out of nowhere. The electoral college is something that we inherit from the way that English law is done. The way that English law is done is something that actually goes back and has been developed over the course of a couple of millennium. And so what is and is not illegal is a decision that is a historic decision. And so you can have things that are legal and good. You can have things that are legal and immoral. You can have things that are illegal and bad, and things that are illegal and moral, right? But those are different. You're talking about different categories, and Gnosticism, and because of its legalistic nature, conflates those things all down, and wants to, and then you get
flattens everything,
and you get that revolutionary. It's all so it's a series of revolutions rather than a historic legal development, and Christians have fallen prey to it, and so we don't have any defenses up, because we don't know our own story. We don't know our own history.
Jason, here's what I've seen, and I think this is very fascinating. I don't want to belittle anything you said, so this is an attack, but I just as an actual response in association with. I've seen that. So when you are ignorant and you don't understand the story that you're in, or the story that's happening right now, there's two things. So one is understanding the story we're in, connected through history, the way God has connected us through history, which is why the common law is so important, because I think it is the telling of the story as a mapping of the biblical narrative of history, and common law is honoring that history as it operates. But when you don't understand the historical story God has put you in, and you don't understand the story that the other side is currently trying to run on you, the play they're trying to run on you, they're putting you in a different story, then you just come up with answers that are just the antithesis to the current moment, right? And so long as it's not them, well, Trump lost the election. He won it, right? Those kind of responses put you in a place where you only have to take either or. It's a fallacy. It's the either or fallacy,
right?
Or what's another one right now? The whole crack pipe thing that's going on. Have you been paying attention to that?
No.
So right now there is a grant from the federal government. I think it's like $36 million. They're deciding to give out to certain entities that are deciding to create these what they call them, certain sort of kits, smoking kits. I think that's what they're calling them now. So that this kit has all the things you need so you can smoke or do your cocaine or whatever it is safely. In New York, they have places that are actually shooting you up.
Yeah.
And so they've created these kits. And so people said, what, they're creating crack pipes inside of these kits? Like, oh my goodness. And so everybody's mad at this. And I'm thinking, these are the kind of folks that kill babies.
Right.
It's not like, but everybody's like, so then the federal government, Jen Psaki came out with a statement, said, no, there's no crack pipes in these kits to defuse the situation.
As if the problem with the federal government paying for people's drug habits is which drugs.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. And so everybody's like, so she knows that if they take the crack pipes out, then they're like, I was on Whitlock talking about this. I said, I was very disappointed that they withdrew the crack pipes because I'm thinking they don't believe in their own system. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Forget the crack pipes. I think they should apply the cocaine and the crack too, and money to go gambling with and the shopping spree at Gucci for $39,000. I don't understand why we're stopping here. Right. Because the point is that any form of engagement with this at all is outside of their realms of authority. I don't care if they did $5. The whole system itself is broken. But the way that we're fighting it is that we only care so long as it's not that. We'll take even something that's wrong as long as it's not the one that they're offering us. And that's what I meant earlier about critical race theory. It does the same thing. It's like, so long as it's you, as long as you guys are fighting, we don't care. But we haven't gotten back to the foundations of what is normal, what is right, and what should be your role and responsibility in this. So I guess like I don't think we're going to get, this is like the introduction to common law. And so,
well, because what you're talking about is that there was a Greek, I can't remember which Greek, that in the discussion that was talking about how, if as soon as people realize that the mob, if it's a democracy, the mob can vote themselves a raise, right? As soon as they realize that, the whole thing goes away, right? So that because it doesn't depend, if it's just whatever people vote for becomes the law of the land. If there's no law above the people making the laws, then you have opportunity for basically people to vote themselves a raise. And then why wouldn't you just keep voting yourself more and more of a raise, right?
Yeah.
Now, they wouldn't have even imagined minimum wage laws, but that's what he's describing, right?
Right.
All the way back there, that's what he's describing. So we have been slowly moving towards a democracy, and a democracy is so we began as a representative republic within the English common law tradition.
Would you say we're written as a representative republic, even though we might have always acted like a representative republic?
Yeah, we haven't always acted like it.
Yeah.
But the laws on the books are representative republic. But we've slowly moved towards a democracy. And you see this in a number of places, right? You see this in, the Senate used to not be voted on. The Senate was just sent. Right, by sometimes it was the governor, sometimes it was the state Senate sent Senate representatives.
Oh, interesting! Right? I didn't know that.
Now we vote on our senators, right? So that was so it used to be that the Senate was there to represent the state as an entity, right? Because the state is its own entity, and then the federal government was made up of representatives of the many states, and then the Congress was intended to represent the population, right? But so the congression, so we have two representatives that go from each state. There's no way those people, right? But then the the congressmen come from smaller areas where you're within a district. The idea being that's close enough that they can represent this district, this group of people. So they're not supposed to be state representatives. They're district representatives because they're representing the population, and the Senate then is there to represent the state, because you've got multiple jurisdictions layered on top of one another that are there to keep one another in check, right? The checks and balances aren't just that we have three federal three areas to our federal government. The checks and balances are all the way up and down. But we've gotten rid of that the whole mindset of checks and balances is gone, because it's become about who can gain the most power. And it gained certain people power to move us towards democracy in the past, away from being a representative republic. One of the other places that you see this really clearly that actually touches down a little bit more is we talk about the amendments to the Constitution like they're our rights.
Right. Oh man, this is so good. Yeah, right. Go ahead.
Rather than being limitations on the jurisdiction of the federal government. Right.
That's so good. You would think with the Ninth Amendment that we would understand this. And this is why the anti-federalists...
We don't get that far in our reading.
No, honestly, no. What do we... Well, we do, but we skip.
Yeah,
so
we skip.
Don't,
yeah.
we stop at the 14th, 15th, 13th Amendments where we're stopping at, right? 13, 14, 15 minutes, and we're done, right? Like 1, 5, 13, 14, right? That's kind of how we look at the amendments, right?
Yeah. And instead of having... So it is the Bill of Rights, but it's not telling us what we are allowed to do. It's telling the federal government what they're not allowed to stop us from doing.
That's right.
Right. That's a different way of thinking about rights. So if the Bill of Rights is the federal government granting us rights, then they can take those away.
Yeah.
Right.
And they can make up new ones.
They can make up new ones. Right. Yeah.
Right.
So they're the ones that are, if the origin of the right is the federal government, that's how we talk. And it's that way because we put the people in that would give us these rights.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We become a democracy that say, well, you know what? We want these rights now to be in place. And so let's make sure we vote on these people. Everybody's playing that game right now.
Everybody does.
Vote on these people to bring us these rights instead of saying, hold on, which is what the Ninth Amendment really, really is doing. Said there are unenumerated rights that belong to the people.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't belong to the government at all. And so
what's so interesting is we act as if the Bill of Rights, and I've heard people say this was in my history textbooks. I was surprised to find out this wasn't true, that the Bill of Rights was something new. Right. The Bill of Rights was put in there because as they were writing it, everybody assumed these were the rights that we would bring forward because they're the rights of an Englishman, right? These are all worked out over the course of history in canon law, right? These are the rights that can't be taken by the government because they're outside the government's jurisdiction, right? The government doesn't have jurisdiction over the media.
Right? Where'd that come from? Yeah.
Why? It's because the media is that information is the commonwealth of all, right? This is just by default they were a natural check and balance to the government. Yeah. Well, so that information is not the civil government is not staying in its realm if it's trying to control information. Information is the commonwealth of all. The ability to travel within, within your as a citizen, you're able to travel within your area, right?
Right.
That's part of your rights. That's not enumerated, but it's part of the common rights of the English. This is why everybody. This is when you start having to show papers to travel, right? You are now outside, the government is outside of its jurisdiction because the roads are the commonwealth of all, right? And whether it's roads in the sky, roads on the ground, roads in the seas, their maritime law is a little bit different, because there is more at stake in maritime law. But the roads, as a citizen, the roads are your commonwealth. This is where libertarians are they're just no longer dealing within the historic development of rights when they start saying we can privatize all the roads, right? You can't privatize all the roads because the roads are the commonwealth of all, right? And this was worked out over hundreds of years as the English tried to figure out, can you keep people from crossing a bridge without paying a toll? Are you allowed to do that? And the decision that was made back then, that's still the way it is, it's probably gone away within the last 20 years or 30 years because of all the revolutions in law. But the decision was only to pay off the bridge. Once the bridge is paid off, you can collect a toll when upkeep is needed to pay the upkeep, right? You still have some of these laws are still there when it comes to parking meters. You can't spend money in a parking meter anywhere except for on the roads, right?
Well, and
has to, because of these common laws that go all the way back that say, well, the ability to pass on a bridge is a right, right?
And this is exactly what I meant by when I was saying earlier, the reason that libertarians are arguing this way is not for the central principle of what existed in history. They're arguing that way because of the other side saying, well, we got to have government funds in order to be able to make roads. And so they've completely disconnected themselves from the real argument in history, right, to a false one. And they say, well, we don't need the government to make roads, which is true. Fair enough. It's a true argument, right? But they're not getting back to the original intent of the issue and the historical one that it's tied to be able to make the foundational central case for what a road is, metaphysical realities of what a road is and what is it for, right?
Yeah, exactly. And what is freedom, right?
And freedom.
So if I can't travel the roads, then I'm someone's slave. If I'm a free man, then I can travel the roads, right? And this is where but there's all kinds of laws like this that were developed over time where people learned. I sent you my opinion on that 7-minute summary of of the Magna Carta and its history from Audible. I was livid because they basically went in there and they said, this is what the Magna Carta is, and this is why this is what's wrong with it, right? It doesn't protect it never talks about the people. It doesn't set up a set of ideals on how the peoples are supposed to be free and all this. I was like, what are you talking about? That's not what the Magna Carta was even trying to do, and that's not what makes it important. As the law went forward, there were 3 of the 65 principles laid out in the Magna Carta that were universalized to the rest of the population. But it was a charter that had to do with the relationship of the barons and the king that limited the king's powers back to what it had been before the king started overstepping his bounds, right? So King John, the Robin Hood King John, he was the brother of Richard Coeur de Lion, which is, so there was Henry the Lion, followed by Richard the Lion-Hearted. Coeur de Lion means heart of the lion, right? So he's lion-hearted, the lion-hearted king. He goes off to fight in the Crusades and ends up a prisoner, and his brother says, well, now that I'm in charge, I can start doing stuff, right? I just can't wait to be king. And right, it's that Lion King situation. And he says, everybody do this, everybody do that, and he starts, and the barons get together and they say, he's overstepped his jurisdiction, right? And so they force him to sign the Magna Carta saying, we are putting in writing what up till now has been the traditionally understood jurisdiction, and the way that it was held together was by public vows, right? So everybody made public vows, and they had a public memory that held the limitations on everything. And they said, you forgot. So because you're being dumb, we're going to write it down for you, king. Right. But it wasn't as if they made these things up, and it wasn't as if, and they didn't write it. It took multiple months of negotiating to come down to to an agreement on what are the rights of the king. Then the king signs it, and then the king ignores it, and then there's a war, and then they establish it. And it's more complex than that. But what it is they begin to write down what is commonly understood through public vows, because the kingdom is getting beyond the point where everybody can know each other, right? When everybody knows each other, if you get up and you say your marriage vows, you have your pledge, your vows, your declaration, all the things that are necessary to make a marriage, and everybody from the community is there. You don't need a marriage license.
That's right.
Because everybody remembers the wedding. Everybody is a witness to the vows. You've got the official witnesses, right? The maid or matron of honor, you've got the official witnesses that are standing up there with them. That's their job. They've got a legal job. They are agreeing to legally hold these people to the vows. So you put them close enough to make sure they can hear all the vows perfectly. Right. And now we put them in beautiful dresses and all those things as well, which is great. But the point of it is it's a public legal taking of vows, and everything used to be done that way. The Magna Carta begins the process of writing it down so that it can expand beyond and enter into conversation beyond just your personal smaller kingdoms and communities. So, if somebody commits adultery in a small town and everybody was at the wedding, you don't have to go get the marriage license and say, well, look, you signed this and made this vow, right? Everybody was there. When you're dealing with marriage licenses across borders, or marriages across borders, you have to figure out a way to write it down. Now, of course, marriage licenses were invented to keep interracial marriages from happening. So we should get rid of those. But
that's for another time.
That's for another time. Yeah.
So here's we gotta, man, we're just getting, so here's what I want to do. This is the first time we're going to do this. What should we be reading? Because here's what I've noticed, Jason. I want to close with this. Something happened really interesting this week. I went out to Alabama, and we probably got 10 or 12 shows now. The average show is about 2 hours. But what I've noticed in these shows is that these shows have sharpened me something awful tremendously. It's making me think about things completely different. I'm reading content in a way that is making me a different kind of man, and I'm being taught in a way that I see the world differently. So I know how to engage it with a certain type of joy too. And because of that, I feel like in some sense, like you're running kind of a college education, or the education I've always wanted, inside of these shows. And so I'm just so grateful for that. But what I want to do this time is I want you to kind of lay out just quickly, what is it that we can read or have with us as we go to drop next Tuesday? We're going to drop the show on the common law.
Work
through that.
Okay.
What would be some things that we should be abreast of or dig into so that we can really dig into this pretty deep, and we can bring our audience along with us without having to kind of explain from beginning? So this is the first time I'm going to do, because I think that there's a lot of connections to this that run from both sides historically in the past to the future, where we're going and where we currently are now, so that we can understand immediately how to apply something like this. So what would be just something we can brush up on?
Oh, like man.
One or two things. Only one or two things.
One or two things. Something small. So the common law as we use it now begins with the Book of Alfred, or the Laws of King Alfred. But what he does is he brings together the laws of the kingdoms of England, and then the laws of the Book of Deuteronomy, because he says we've got, and then the Roman law. So those are the three things that have been that he considers to be authoritative on the soil of England legally. Is the Bible, right? And the Book of Deuteronomy in particular, he says this is the case law of the Ten Commandments, right? You've got Ten Commandments, you've got 3 sermons in Book of Deuteronomy. The second sermon has 10 divisions, one for each of the 10 commandments, and it's case law concerning that particular commandment. So he says the Book of Deuteronomy is legally binding on the soil of England. The Roman law is legally binding on the soil of England. And the laws of the kingdoms of England, the 7 kingdoms of England, is legally binding. And so that's the law that as it's been worked out. And he pulls that into the Book of Alfred, or the Law of Alfred. So that, and then, so, I mean, I would think maybe like if you could read the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights.
Okay, that's what we're gonna do.
Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights, then we'll look at those and discuss how those fit into how to accept those in a non-Gnostic context.